The gala had been planned for months. Invitations printed on heavy cream cardstock, embossed with gold foil, had arrived at the homes of the city's wealthiest families. The event was billed as a charity fundraiser for children's hospitals, but everyone knew it was more than that. It was a stage where fortunes were flaunted, alliances were made, and reputations were sharpened like knives. The Crystal Meridian Hotel had spared no expense. Its grand ballroom stretched wide with marble floors polished to a mirror shine. Chandeliers dripped with thousands of crystals, scattering light like shattered stars across gowns and tuxedos. Tables lined with orchids and roses gave off a perfume that hung in the air, mixing with the faint scent of expensive cigars and imported wine. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their violins weaving a soundtrack of elegance that barely masked the buzz of whispered gossip. To the guests, this was not just another party. It was an arena. CEOs leaned close to rival investors, pretending to exchange pleasantries while calculating future takeovers. Politicians smiled, with teeth too white, their hands already reaching for favors. Socialites twirled in couture dresses designed to be photographed and remembered. Every glance, every handshake, every laugh carried layers of meaning. And at the center of it all was Adrian Kane. He arrived fashionably late, allowing whispers to build before he even set foot on the marble. The doors opened, and he stepped through with Sienna Cruz attached to his arm like a prize he had won. Cameras exploded in flashes, the red fabric of her gown glowing like fire under the light. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her lips curled into a victorious smirk. Adrian loved it. He loved the way people turned, how the whispers followed him. He lived for power, and tonight he was feeding on it. But even as he smiled for the cameras, his eyes scanned the room, calculating who was watching, who was jealous, who might become useful tomorrow. On the far side of the ballroom, Elena stood quietly. Her navy dress was simple compared to the glittering gowns around her. No diamonds hung at her throat, no designer clutch dangled from her hand. She had only her presence, and that, though understated, spoke louder than sequins ever could. She looked fragile and strong all at once, her hand resting gently over her swollen belly. Few noticed her at first. To most, she was just another guest, another face in the crowd. But then someone whispered her name. The whisper spread like wildfire. Isn't that his ex-wife? The pregnant one? Why would she come here? Eyes turned, conversations faltered. Elena felt the heat of their stares prickling against her skin. She had prepared herself for this, had told herself she would stand tall. But the cruelty of high society always found its mark. They didn't see her as a woman or a mother. They saw her as a scandal, a headline, a story to feed their curiosity. Meanwhile, Sienna basked in the attention. She clutched Adrian's arm tighter, tilting her head to whisper in his ear. Her words carried just far enough for Elena to hear. She looks pathetic, like she doesn't belong here. Elena's jaw tightened. She refused to give Sienna the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, she lifted her chin, forcing her breathing steady. She had built this room. The architecture, the design, the elegance of the space, all of it bore her touch. Yet here she was, treated as though she were an intruder in her own creation. The irony burned. The gala pressed on, with waiters gliding across the floor carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Guests gathered in clusters, laughing too loudly, clinking glasses with people they secretly despised. On stage, a host gave a speech about generosity and compassion, while the audience nodded, their minds elsewhere, on stock portfolios, on mistresses, on reputations. To Elena, the whole evening felt like a play. Everyone was acting. Everyone wore masks. She thought of her own marriage, how Adrian had worn his mask so well that she hadn't seen the betrayal until it shattered her life. Her hand drifted protectively over her belly. She whispered to her child under her breath, "We'll be okay, I promise." But even as she said it, her throat tightened with unshed tears. Then came the moment that tipped the balance. Adrian led Sienna toward the center of the ballroom, where photographers waited. He posed deliberately, his hand on her waist, his smile wide. He introduced her to influential investors, as if she were his partner, his equal. Not a secret, not a fling, a statement. The crowd erupted in whispers, some feigning shock, others smirking knowingly. Cameras clicked, catching every angle. And there, across the room, Elena stood frozen, forced to watch her ex-husband rewrite history as if she had never existed. The orchestra swelled, playing a waltz. Couples glided onto the dance floor, their gowns sweeping in time with the music. Adrian pulled Sienna close, spinning her as cameras captured the perfect picture of glamour. And then, inevitably, someone turned to Elena and asked with mock sweetness, "Don't you wish you were out there too?" The cruelty of the question cut deep. Elena's lips parted, but no words came. Her chest heaved as the room spun, the chandeliers blurring into streaks of light. Her knees weakened, the chatter grew distant. She felt her body sway, her hand clutching at the air for balance. In that glittering room filled with power, wealth, and arrogance, Elena's heart began to fall. And as she collapsed onto the marble floor, surrounded by the gasps of New York's elite, one truth became clear. This night would not be remembered for its charity, but for the scandal that was about to erupt. Sienna Cruz had always known how to turn heads. At 26, she had perfected the art of entering a room like she owned it. Tonight, with her crimson dress hugging every curve and diamonds catching the light at her throat, she was more than a guest. She was a declaration. A declaration that she had won. She had clawed her way into this world from nothing. Born in Queens to a mother who worked double shifts at a diner and a father who disappeared before her second birthday, Sienna learned early that survival meant performance. She wasn't the smartest in her class, but she was the most ambitious. By 16, she had mastered how to use her beauty, her charm, and her ruthless instinct to climb ladders others didn't even know existed. When she met Adrian Kane at a corporate event, she recognized him instantly. Not as a man, but as an opportunity. He was older, powerful, radiating the kind of confidence that came from knowing the world bent to his will. Most women were intimidated by him. Sienna wasn't. She laughed louder, leaned closer, and gave him the thrill of being pursued. Within weeks, she was in his penthouse. Within months, she was in his bed. Now she was in his spotlight. As Elena lay collapsed on the marble, the room frozen in shock, Sienna's lips curled into something that was almost a smile. For her, this was victory served cold. She had spent months in Adrian's shadow, whispered about, dismissed as a passing fling. But tonight, the cameras captured her, not as a secret, but as the woman at Adrian Kane's side, while his ex-wife lay broken. She leaned into Adrian's ear, her voice low but sharp. "Don't make a scene, people are watching." But Adrian wasn't listening. For the first time all evening, the mask of arrogance had slipped. He stared at Elena, pale and trembling, and panic flared in his eyes. Sienna hated it. She hated the way he looked at her, like the ghost of a love he hadn't buried. "Adrian," she hissed, her nails digging into his arm, "she's not your problem anymore. Let the medics handle it." His jaw tightened, but he pulled away from her grip. Cameras caught the movement, the subtle rejection. And in that single gesture, Sienna felt the first sting of insecurity. She had worked too hard for this. She wasn't going to let Elena, weak, fragile Elena, steal the spotlight back. Sienna turned to the crowd, playing her role with venom hidden beneath velvet. "Oh, poor thing," she said loudly enough for the nearest guests to hear. "Pregnancy is so exhausting, isn't it? Maybe she shouldn't push herself to attend events like these." Gasps rippled. Some nodded in agreement, others exchanged uneasy glances. But the damage was done. The narrative had been seeded. Elena was fragile, irresponsible, unfit. Meanwhile, Adrian knelt beside his ex-wife, ignoring the whispers. For a man who thrived on reputation, this was uncharacteristic. He had built his empire on never showing weakness, never letting anyone see the cracks. But tonight, the sight of Elena on the floor pierced deeper than his pride. "Stay with me," he whispered urgently, his hand brushing her cheek. Cameras flashed, capturing the rare moment of vulnerability. For the tabloids, it was gold. For Sienna, it was poison. She clenched her fists, her nails leaving crescents in her palms. She had seen enough powerful men falter when faced with the ghosts of their pasts, but she had never expected Adrian Kane, her Adrian, to be one of them. As paramedics lifted Elena onto a stretcher, Sienna forced her lips back into a practiced smile. She moved closer to Adrian, clutching his arm as if to remind both him and the watching crowd of her place. "She'll be fine," she cooed sweetly, though her eyes were sharp with fury. "Focus on us. Tonight was supposed to be about us." Adrian didn't respond. His gaze followed the stretcher as it disappeared through the ballroom doors. His silence was louder than any argument, and Sienna felt it like a slap, but she wasn't done. Later, as whispers consumed the gala and reporters rushed to send headlines, Sienna positioned herself carefully among the investors. She laughed at their jokes, brushed off their curiosity, and painted herself as the picture of elegance. Yes, it was dramatic, she told one silver-haired CEO. But really, it's best to leave the past in the past. Adrian deserves peace, not more drama. It was calculated. Every word, every smile. She wanted the room to see her as the stable one, the one who belonged at Adrian's side, not the fragile ex-wife. And yet, deep inside, doubt festered. When she caught Adrian standing alone by the balcony, his hands gripping the railing, his expression clouded, she knew the truth. Elena still had a hold on him. It wasn't love, she told herself. It was guilt. Guilt over the child. Guilt over abandoning a woman who had once stood by him. But guilt was dangerous. Guilt could undo everything. Sienna walked toward him, her heels clicking like daggers on marble. She slipped her arm around his waist, leaning close enough that her perfume enveloped him. "Don't let her drag you down," she whispered. "You've worked too hard. She chose to come here. Don't let her weakness ruin your night." Adrian turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing. For once, his voice was cold toward her. "Weakness? She's carrying my child." The words landed like stones in Sienna's stomach. She forced a laugh, but her pulse raced. Exactly. That's all she is now. The mother of your child. You've moved on. You have me. But Adrian's silence lingered, heavy and dangerous. He pulled away, excusing himself to make a call. Sienna stood alone, her fists clenched, her smile brittle. For the first time since stepping into the spotlight, Sienna Cruz realized her crown wasn't secure. And in that shimmering ballroom filled with power, money, and lies, she made herself a promise. If Elena Hart dared to rise again, she would crush her. No mercy, no hesitation. What Sienna didn't know was that outside, under the glare of ambulance lights, forces were already shifting, and Elena was about to gain an ally who would change everything. The moment Elena's body hit the marble, the ballroom turned into a theater of chaos. Gasps rose from every corner, hands flew to jeweled mouths, and whispers erupted like wildfire. The music stopped mid-note, violins hanging in silence. For one fragile heartbeat, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Then the flashes began. Photographers at the edge of the room raised their cameras, the shutters snapping relentlessly. To them, compassion was irrelevant. Opportunity was everything. The scene was worth more than any charity headline. Billionaire's pregnant ex-wife collapses at gala. The story practically wrote itself. Elena, lying pale on the cold floor, felt the world spin in dizzying circles. Her chest tightened, her breathing shallow. Somewhere in the distance she heard voices, urgent, panicked, cruel. "Is she drunk?" one guest whispered. "No, she's pregnant," another replied, the tone dripping with judgment. "Tragic," a third murmured. "But why show up here at all? She's embarrassing herself." Every word sliced through the haze of her consciousness. She wanted to scream that she hadn't come here to fight, that she had only wanted to reclaim a sliver of her dignity. But her lips trembled soundlessly, her strength abandoning her. Adrian's shadow loomed above her. He knelt, his polished shoes scuffing against the marble, his face taut with panic. For the first time in years, his voice cracked. "Elena, stay with me. Look at me." Her eyes fluttered open. She saw him, not the ruthless billionaire, not the man who betrayed her, but the boy she had once loved, the man who had once promised to protect her. The vision tore her heart in two. "Don't," she whispered faintly, pushing his hand away from her face. "Touch me." Gasps surged louder this time. The crowd hung on every word, the humiliation amplified under the spotlight. To them, it wasn't a tragedy, it was entertainment. The paramedics arrived, breaking through the circle of gawkers. They crouched down, their voices brisk and commanding. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Stay with us. We're taking you to the hospital." Elena tried to nod, but her body betrayed her. Her head lolled against the stretcher as they lifted her gently. Her hand, trembling, pressed against her swollen belly, as though shielding her child from the cruelty surrounding them. Outside, the chaos only grew. Reporters swarmed the ambulance, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. "Adrian, what happened? Is the baby in danger? Do you regret leaving her?" Adrian shielded his eyes from the barrage, his jaw clenched. For the first time, the master of control had no answers. His empire, his mistress, his carefully curated image, all of it paled in comparison to the sight of Alina disappearing into the ambulance. Sienna followed, her heels clattering angrily against the pavement. She pasted on a smile for the cameras, though her eyes burned with rage. "It's nothing," she told a reporter sweetly. "She's just overwhelmed. You know how delicate some women can be." The words spread instantly, recorded, tweeted, posted. Within minutes, hashtags trended worldwide. Gala scandal, billionaire X, Alina heart collapse. By the time Alina reached the hospital, her humiliation was already viral. Tabloids published side-by-side photos, Sienna glowing on Adrian's arm, Alina pale and fragile on the floor. The headlines were merciless. Billionaire's new flame shines while ex-wife crumbles. Adrian Kane's past collapses at his feet. Pregnancy drama at the gala of the year. In the sterile hospital room, Alina lay weak but conscious. Monitors beeped steadily, her baby's heartbeat echoing faintly through the speakers. Relief washed over her at the sound, but it was short-lived. She knew the outside world was devouring her pain like a feast. Her phone, resting on the bedside table, buzzed endlessly. Messages from friends, colleagues, even strangers flooded in. Some offered sympathy. Others spewed venom. One text from an unknown number read simply, "Pathetic. Stay home next time." Tears pricked her eyes, but she bit them back. She had cried too much already. She would not give them more. Meanwhile, across the city, Adrian's PR team scrambled. They issued statements about health concerns, crafted excuses, tried to spin the narrative. But no press release could erase the image of him kneeling beside his ex-wife, panic etched on his face. No carefully chosen words could erase Alina's rejection. "Don't touch me." Sienna, however, wasted no time. She called in favors with influencers, fed quotes to gossip sites. She painted Alina as unstable, desperate, clinging to a man who had already moved on. "She came to the gala just to make a scene," Sienna told one journalist privately, knowing it would be published by morning. And it was. By dawn, Alina's reputation was in tatters. The world saw her not as the gifted architect who once dreamed of building sanctuaries, but as the fragile ex-wife who collapsed under the weight of humiliation. Back at the hospital, Alina stared at the ceiling, her hand on her stomach. She whispered to her unborn child, "I'll protect you. Even if the world laughs, I'll protect you." Her voice cracked, but her resolve hardened, because beneath the pain, a fire was beginning to spark. She remembered the whispers, the judgment, the way Sienna smirked. She remembered Adrian's silence, his failure to shield her, his willingness to let her be devoured by the wolves. And she realized something vital. She could no longer wait for anyone to save her. If she was going to rise again, she would have to do it herself. But fate had other plans. As the night deepened, footsteps echoed in the hospital hallway. A figure appeared in the doorway, a man she had not seen in years, his presence commanding, his expression unreadable. He wasn't just anyone. He was Michael Blackwood, a billionaire whose name carried weight across continents. More importantly, he had once been Alina's friend. His eyes softened as they met hers. "Alina," he said quietly, "you don't have to go through this alone." And in that single moment, everything began to change. The sterile scent of disinfectant lingered in the hospital room. Machines hummed quietly, their steady beeps a cruel reminder that Alina was tethered to fragile life by wires and tubes. She stared at the ceiling, her body heavy, her spirit heavier. The collapse at the gala had left her drained, but the humiliation burned deeper than the faint bruises on her skin. Her child stirred inside her, a tiny movement that should have comforted her. Instead, it filled her with guilt. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I should be stronger for you, but I don't know how much more I can take." Her mother, Margaret, sat in the corner, her face lined with worry. She had rushed in as soon as the news broke, her nurse's instincts colliding with a mother's heartache. She wanted to soothe her daughter, but she knew words would only skim the surface of the wound. "The baby's strong," she said softly. "The doctor said you just need rest." But Alina shook her head, her eyes glassy. "It's not just about rest, Mom. It's the whole world. They saw me fall. They laughed. They called me weak." Margaret moved closer, taking her hand. "Let them talk. They don't know you. You've survived worse." But Alina wasn't sure. This wasn't just gossip whispered in small-town streets. This was global, viral, unrelenting. The image of her collapsing was replayed on every network, dissected on every blog. Sienna's sly comments circulated like venom. Adrian's silence was spun into 1,000 interpretations, none of them flattering to her. Alone at night, when her mother dozed in the chair and the hallway quieted, Alina scrolled through her phone despite the doctor's warning to avoid stress. The comments seared her. She just wanted attention. Pathetic ex-wife moment. No wonder he left her. She can't even take care of herself. How will she raise a child? Each word was a dagger. She put the phone down, pressing her hands against her ears as if she could block out the voices. But they echoed anyway, replaying in her mind until tears soaked her pillow. The nurses were kind, but kindness only reminded her of how far she had fallen. She had once walked red carpets, introduced as Adrian Kane's wife. Now she was a patient, pitied, and whispered about in the same breath. Adrian visited once, late at night when the cameras were gone. He stood awkwardly at the foot of her bed, his hands shoved into his pockets. For a moment he looked almost human, his arrogance stripped away. "Elena," he said softly. I'm glad you and the baby are okay." She didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, refusing to meet his. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he continued. "The stress, the crowd, it was too much. Maybe you should have stayed home." The words shattered whatever fragile hope remained in her chest. He still didn't understand. To him, her collapse was an inconvenience, not a wound. He hadn't come to comfort her. He had come to absolve himself. "Get out," she whispered. "Elena, get out." Her voice trembled, but it carried steel. For once he listened. He turned, his footsteps echoing down the hall, leaving her lonelier than before. The next morning, a bouquet arrived with no card. Roses, perfectly arranged, placed carefully on her bedside table. For a fleeting moment, she thought Adrian had sent them as an apology. But the nurse said differently. "They're from Michael Blackwood," she explained. Elena blinked. The name stirred old memories. Long nights in college studios, late conversations about dreams, a man who had once been her closest friend before Adrian pulled her into his orbit. Michael had disappeared into the world of global business, becoming a billionaire in his own right. She hadn't spoken to him in years. She touched the petals, her mind swirling with questions. Why now? Why him? But even the gesture couldn't lift the crushing weight of despair. On the third night, alone again, she broke. She slid from the bed and knelt on the cold floor, clutching her belly as sobs racked her body. "I can't do this," she cried. "I can't raise you while the world hates me. I can't fight them. I can't fight him." Her tears dripped onto the linoleum, her shoulders shaking violently. In that moment, she was no longer Elena Hart, the talented architect, the woman who once dreamed of changing skylines. She was just a broken soul, begging the universe for relief. Her mother found her there, crumpled and trembling. She wrapped her arms around her daughter, rocking her gently like she had when Alina was a child. "You are not weak," Margaret whispered fiercely. "You are stronger than any of them. You just can't see it yet." But Alina wasn't convinced. By morning, more tabloids had printed stories. Paparazzi lingered outside the hospital. Sienna gave another interview, smirking as she dismissed Elena as an unfortunate distraction. Investors whispered that Adrian's reputation had been dented by his ex-wife's drama. Alina watched it unfold from her hospital bed, her spirit sinking lower with every headline. She had become a liability, a spectacle, a joke. One evening, as the city lights blinked outside her window, Michael Blackwood appeared again, not just as flowers this time, but in person. He filled the doorway with quiet strength, his tailored suit sharp, his gaze steady. "Elena," he said gently, stepping closer. "You don't deserve this, none of it, and I won't stand by while they destroy you." She looked up, her eyes swollen from crying. "It's too late, Michael. They already have." He shook his head, pulling up a chair. "No, they've only written their version of the story, but you still have yours, and I can help you tell it." His words lingered in the room, a spark against the darkness. For the first time in days, Elena felt a flicker of something she thought she had lost, hope. And as Michael leaned forward, his eyes burning with determination, Elena realized her downfall might only be the beginning of her rise. The hospital room was quiet except for the faint hum of machines. Elena sat upright against the pillows, her hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes still rimmed with exhaustion. She had expected another night of silence, maybe another restless attempt to sleep, but instead, Michael Blackwood stood at the foot of her bed. It had been nearly a decade since she had last seen him. Back then, he had been the brilliant, stubborn business student who pulled all-nighters beside her in the university library. He had carried a notebook full of ideas that most people dismissed as impossible dreams. But Michael never cared about being dismissed. He only cared about proving them wrong. And he had. Now, at 40, he was one of the most powerful men in the world. His name carried weight in every boardroom, his empire stretched across industries, and his fortune dwarfed Adrian's by billions. To most people, he was untouchable. To Elena, in this fragile moment, he was the first face from her past that didn't judge, didn't sneer, didn't pity. "Michael," she whispered, still disbelieving, "why are you here?" He pulled a chair closer, his movements measured. "Because I saw what happened. The entire world saw what happened, and I couldn't sit back and let them tear you apart." Elena looked down, ashamed. "They already did. I'm a headline now, a punchline." "Not if you stop letting them control the story," Michael said, his tone calm but firm. She shook her head. "You don't understand. Adrian owns the narrative. He has money, media, influence. Sienna feeds them whatever lie she wants, and they believe it. What do I have? Nothing." Michael leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "You have me." The words startled her. She searched his face for pity but found none. His expression was resolute, steady, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "Elena," he continued, "Adrian doesn't just control the media. He controls perception. He built an empire on arrogance and manipulation. But I know things about him, things that could destroy the pedestal he stands on. And if you're willing, I'll help you expose him." Her breath caught. "Expose him? Why?" Michael's jaw tightened. "Because men like Adrian believe they can crush anyone who stands in their way. He thinks you're broken, he thinks you'll crawl back or disappear quietly. But I won't let him win, not this time. Not at your expense." Elena's heart raced. The thought of Adrian's empire crumbling was intoxicating, but fear wrapped tightly around her chest. "Michael, I don't want revenge. I just want peace." "Peace doesn't come from silence," Michael replied. "It comes from standing up, from showing the world you're not who they think you are. And you're not weak, Elena. You never were." She turned her face away, tears threatening again. "I don't know if I can." Michael reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek black folder. He laid it gently on her lap. "Then let me show you something." With trembling hands, Elena opened the folder. Inside were documents, photographs, contracts, evidence. Adrian's deals, the ones he bragged about, the ones that made him untouchable, weren't as clean as the world believed. Hidden within the glossy surface of his empire were cracks. Illegal partnerships, backdoor deals, scandals hushed with money. Elena's eyes widened as she scanned the pages. How do you have this?" Michael's gaze held hers. "Because I've been watching him. Adrian isn't just your ex-husband, Elena. He's my rival. And when he hurt you, he made it personal." Her mind spun. She had come to the gala to reclaim dignity, only to collapse in humiliation. And now, just days later, she held in her hands the power to destroy the man who had broken her. Her fingers trembled over the papers. "If this is true, if I use it, they'll turn against him. He'll fall." "And you'll rise," Michael said simply. The idea terrified her. She had never sought power, never dreamed of revenge. Her world had always been about creation, not destruction. Yet something deep inside stirred, a memory of who she used to be. The woman who sketched buildings not because she was told to, but because she believed in beauty, in strength, in making her mark. For the first time since the divorce, Elena felt a flicker of that old fire. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "You could use this yourself. Take him down without me." Michael's expression softened. "Because this isn't about me. It's about you taking back what he stole. Your voice, your dignity, your future. And if you decide to fight, I'll stand beside you. Every step." Her throat tightened. She had been abandoned, mocked, discarded. Now someone was offering not just sympathy, but power. Still, doubt gnawed at her. "What if I fail?" Michael leaned closer, his voice low and steady. "Then you fail standing, not kneeling, and that makes all the difference." Silence filled the room. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the city, the world still spinning with gossip and headlines. But in that small space, Elena felt time pause. the weight of choice pressed against her chest. She closed the folder slowly, her hands steadying. If I do this, if I fight, it won't just be about me, it'll be about my child, about the life I want them to have. Michael nodded. Then let's give them a future worth fighting for. For the first time in days, Elena sat taller. The despair that had drowned her began to thin, replaced by something sharper, something alive. She wasn't sure if it was courage or anger, but it was enough. And as she met Michael's unwavering gaze, Elena realized this wasn't just survival anymore. It was the beginning of war. The morning sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, casting pale stripes across Elena's bed. For days she had lain there, weakened, trapped between shame and exhaustion. But now, something inside her had shifted. Michael's words still echoed in her mind. Peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from standing up. She rose slowly, her legs unsteady, but her spirit steadier than it had been in months. Each step across the room felt like defiance, a small rebellion against the humiliation that had nearly destroyed her. She caught her reflection in the mirror above the sink, pale skin, tired eyes, hair tangled from restless nights. For a moment, she barely recognized herself. But then she pressed her hand against the mirror, whispering, "This isn't who you are, not anymore." When Margaret arrived with breakfast, she was startled to see her daughter sitting upright, her back straight, her gaze fierce. "Elena, you need to rest," she urged. "I will," Elena replied, "but not in the way you think." By the end of the week, she was discharged. The cameras swarmed outside, shouting questions, snapping photos, hoping for another glimpse of the broken woman. But Elena didn't lower her head this time. She walked past them with quiet dignity, her navy coat wrapped around her, her hand protectively over her belly. She didn't answer a single question. Silence was no longer weakness, it was strategy. Michael waited for her by the car. The moment their eyes met, she gave him a small nod. A silent agreement, she was ready. The next days were a blur of transformation. Michael introduced her to his inner circle. Stylists, advisors, and strategists who understood not just fashion but perception. "If they want to treat you like a spectacle," Michael told her, "then you'll give them one, but on your terms." Her old clothes, plain and functional, were replaced with tailored gowns that exuded elegance without pretense. A stylist swept her hair into clean, powerful lines that framed her face, revealing the strength in her features. Makeup no longer tried to hide her pain, it highlighted her resilience. When she saw herself in the mirror after the first fitting, her breath caught. She didn't look like the humiliated woman sprawled on the gala floor. She looked like someone reborn. But the transformation wasn't just about appearance. Michael insisted on more. "You need to speak," he said. "Not just to defend yourself, but to define yourself. The world needs to hear your voice, not his lies." So he arranged sessions with a coach, teaching her how to hold her posture, how to use silence as power, how to look a reporter in the eye and let them know she wasn't afraid. At first, Elena stumbled, her voice shaking, her nerves fraying. But each session chipped away at the fear until her words grew clear, strong, undeniable. Privately, she returned to her sketches too. Late at night, when the city quieted, she sat at her desk with pencil in hand, drawing lines that grew into buildings, structures that symbolized resilience. She realized she hadn't lost her gift. It had only been buried under grief. One evening, Margaret found her hunched over a sketch pad. "You're designing again," her mother whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Elena smiled faintly. "I need to remember who I am." Meanwhile, the world outside continued to churn. Sienna posed for magazines, flaunting her relationship with Adrian. Headlines screamed of her glamour, her charm, her supposed place at his side. But cracks began to show. Anonymous leaks hinted at Adrian's shady deals. Whispers spread through boardrooms that his empire wasn't as stable as it seemed. And for the first time, Elena didn't shrink from the headlines. She studied them, her eyes sharp, waiting for the right moment. Michael guided her carefully. "This isn't just about revenge," he reminded her. "It's about showing the world that you can't be erased. When you rise, you don't just rise for yourself. You rise for every woman who was ever told she was nothing without a man." The words became her anchor. The night of her first public appearance since the collapse arrived 2 weeks later. It wasn't a gala or a red carpet. It was a charity fundraiser for single mothers, one that Michael had quietly sponsored. When Elena entered, the room hushed. Cameras turned, flashes exploded, but this time, she was ready. She wore a flowing white gown that emphasized her pregnancy, not as a weakness, but as a crown. Her posture was tall, her gaze steady, her hand resting protectively yet proudly over her belly. Whispers rippled. "Is that her? She looks different, stronger." When she stepped onto the stage to speak, the crowd held its breath. Her voice wavered for only a moment before steadying. "I am Elena Hart," she began. "Some of you may know me only from the headlines, the woman who fell. But what you don't know is that I am still standing, and I always will." Applause erupted. Cameras captured every word, every expression. The narrative was shifting. No longer was she the ex-wife defined by humiliation. She was becoming a symbol of resilience. Back in their penthouse, Adrian and Sienna watched the broadcast on television. Sienna scoffed, rolling her eyes. She's milking it, playing the victim. But Adrian didn't respond. His jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the screen. For the first time, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: fear. Because Elena wasn't disappearing. She was returning, and she was stronger than before. Later that night, after the event ended, Michael found her backstage, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright with adrenaline. "You did it," he said simply. Elena shook her head. "No, I just started." And as she spoke, she realized the truth. Her transformation wasn't just about surviving Adrian's betrayal. It was about preparing for the moment she would face him again, not as a victim, but as his equal. The night of the global humanitarian gala arrived like a storm waiting to break. It was the kind of event that drew the richest, the most powerful, and the most ruthless into one glittering room. The ballroom of the Empire Crown Hotel glistened with chandeliers, velvet drapes, and golden candelabras. Journalists lined the carpet, flashes popping like fireworks as limousines pulled up one after another. For Adrian Kane, this was supposed to be another victory lap. Dressed in a tailored tuxedo, his arm around Sienna's waist, he strode into the ballroom like a king. Sienna, dazzling in emerald silk, clung to him like a queen. Together they posed for cameras, their smiles polished, their eyes hungry. But beneath the surface, Adrian was restless. He had seen Elena's recent appearance on television, her quiet strength, her poised words. It unsettled him. He told himself she was no threat, just a fleeting story. But deep inside, fear gnawed at him. Sienna noticed his distraction and squeezed his hand. "Forget her," she whispered. "Tonight is ours." But tonight wasn't theirs. Tonight belonged to Elena. The doors of the ballroom opened again, and she entered. The crowd turned instantly, whispers rippling like waves. Elena Hart, once the humiliated ex-wife, now stood tall in a sleek black gown that flowed elegantly around her growing belly. A diamond pin glimmered at her shoulder, a subtle gift from Michael. Her hair was swept back, her makeup sharp, but it was her expression, calm, fearless, that silenced the room. She didn't sneak in. She didn't try to blend. She walked straight down the carpet, her heels clicking like a drumbeat of defiance. The cameras roared to life, reporters nearly tripping over each other to capture her return. "Is that her? She looks incredible." "She's not hiding anymore." Adrian froze, his hand tightening around Sienna's arm. Sienna's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing with fury. "She's trying to upstage me," she hissed. "She's trying to upstage us," Adrian muttered. But even as he said it, he couldn't look away. Elena didn't glance at them. She took her place near the stage, her presence commanding, her silence louder than any insult Sienna had ever thrown. Michael appeared beside her, offering his arm. The sight of the two of them together sent another shockwave through the room. The evening unfolded with speeches, performances, and auctions. Yet no one could focus. Every eye returned to Elena, every whisper circled around her. She wasn't just a guest, she was the story. Then came the moment. The host stepped onto the stage, announcing the evening's keynote segment, a panel highlighting leaders who inspire change. Elena's name was called. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in, Adrian's jaw tightened. Sienna scoffed. They're really letting her speak? But Elena walked onto the stage with grace, her hand resting proudly on her belly, her eyes scanning the crowd. She paused deliberately when her gaze landed on Adrian and Sienna. Then she began. "For weeks," she said, her voice clear, "the world has defined me by a single moment. When I fell, they replayed it, they dissected it, they called me weak. But tonight, I want to show you what strength really looks like." The room stilled, every ear tuned in. I was betrayed, I was humiliated, I was told I would not survive without the man who abandoned me. But I stand here tonight, not as his ex-wife, not as a victim, but as a woman who refuses to be erased. And I am not alone. Every woman who has ever been silenced, every mother who has ever been dismissed, stands here with me. Applause erupted. Flashes blinded the stage. Elena lifted the black folder Michael had given her. And because truth is stronger than lies, I will no longer remain silent about the man who tried to destroy me. Gasps rippled. Adrian's blood turned cold. Sienna grabbed his arm. What is she doing? Elena opened the folder, her voice steady. Here are the deals Adrian Kane doesn't want you to know about. Illegal partnerships, fraud, money hidden offshore. For years he built an empire on deception. And while he paraded his mistress on his arm, he thought no one would dare expose him. He was wrong. Chaos erupted. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions. Guests murmured in shock. Adrian's face flushed crimson, his composure cracking. That's a lie, he shouted, rising from his table. She's bitter, she's unstable, she's making this up. Elena met his rage with calm. Am I? Then explain these contracts. Explain the signatures. Explain the millions siphoned away while you told the world you were a man of honor. She held up document after document, cameras flashing with every reveal. Sienna clutched Adrian's arm, panicked. Do something. Stop her. But Adrian could only stand there, the room spinning against him. His empire, his reputation, his carefully crafted image, it was all unraveling under Elena's steady voice. The applause grew louder, drowning his protests. Elena closed the folder with finality, her gaze sweeping the crowd. This is not just my story. This is a reminder that truth always rises, even when lies try to bury it. Standing ovation. Reporters stormed the stage, microphones raised, cameras blazing. Adrian tried to shout over them, but no one listened. Sienna's glamorous smile had crumbled into terror. Elena stepped down, Michael at her side, her chin high. She had come into the lion's den, and she had left the lions caged. But as she walked past Adrian, his furious eyes locked on hers, and she knew one thing: he wasn't finished. And the battle that followed would be even darker. The aftermath of the gala rippled through the city like an earthquake. By dawn, every news outlet in the country had splashed Elena Hart's face across their front pages. Headlines screamed her victory. Ex-wife shatters billionaire's empire with truth. Elena Hart, from humiliation to hero. Adrian Kane exposed. The documents she had unveiled were undeniable. Reporters pored over them, experts confirmed their validity, and law enforcement could no longer look away. Adrian's empire, once seen as invincible, began to crack overnight. Stock prices plummeted. Investors withdrew. Board members resigned. And while the world had once laughed at Elena, now they stood in awe. For years, Adrian had defined her as fragile, replaceable, irrelevant. But Elena had proven him wrong in the most public way possible. She hadn't just reclaimed her dignity, she had dismantled the illusion he had built. Sienna Cruz vanished from the spotlight almost immediately. The glamorous mistress who once strutted in emerald gowns now refused to leave her apartment. Tabloids that once praised her beauty now mocked her arrogance. She had gambled her reputation on Adrian's power, and when that power collapsed, she was left with nothing but scorn. Adrian, meanwhile, faced the full weight of consequence. Prosecutors launched investigations into his business dealings. Former allies turned against him to save themselves. The man who had once sneered at Elena from gilded thrones now spent his days in boardrooms filled with lawyers, his empire reduced to ashes. And through it all, Elena remained calm. She gave only one interview, a sit-down broadcast viewed by millions. Dressed in simple white, her hair pulled back, she spoke not with bitterness but with clarity. "I don't share my story for revenge," she said softly, "but for truth. No woman should be silenced. No mother should be mocked for carrying life, and no one, no matter how powerful, should believe they are untouchable." The audience applauded. Viewers wept. Letters poured in from women across the country, thanking her for giving them courage. For Elena, the true victory was not Adrian's fall, but the rising chorus of voices that said, "If she can stand again, so can I." Meanwhile, her personal life began to heal. Her mother, Margaret, stayed by her side, beaming with pride. "You remind me of your father," she told her one evening as they sat on the porch of their family home. "Strong, unshakable when it matters most." Elena placed a hand on her belly, feeling the gentle kick of her child. I want my baby to grow up knowing that strength isn't about money or power. It's about standing tall when the world tries to push you down. Michael Blackwood remained a constant presence. He had offered her strategy, protection, and friendship when she needed it most. But as the weeks passed, their bond deepened into something neither of them had expected. It wasn't the reckless passion she once had with Adrian. It was steadier, built on respect, on history, on shared battles. One afternoon, Michael found her sketching in the sunlit corner of her new office. "You're working again," he said, smiling. She looked up, her eyes bright. "I'm starting my own firm. Projects for women, by women. Affordable housing, schools, spaces that actually serve people instead of egos." Michael's smile grew wider. "That sounds like exactly the kind of empire worth building." For the first time in years, Elena felt whole. She was not defined by the man who betrayed her, not even by the scandal that had once crushed her. She was defined by what she chose to create, by the life she chose to live. The night her baby was born, she held the tiny, crying miracle in her arms and felt the final piece of her heart knit itself back together. Tears streamed down her face, not from sorrow, but from release. She whispered into her child's ear, "You saved me. You gave me a reason to fight. And I promise, I'll never let the world break us again." News outlets tried to get photos, but Elena kept that moment private. The world could have its headlines, but this was hers alone, a sacred beginning, untouched by gossip. Months later, she made one final public appearance. Not at a gala, not at a press conference, but at a small community center her new firm had just completed. Surrounded by children laughing, mothers smiling, and volunteers clapping, she stood on a modest stage and spoke. "I once believed my story ended the night I collapsed on a marble floor," she said. "But I was wrong. That night was not my ending. It was my beginning. Every fall is an invitation to rise. Every betrayal is a chance to rediscover your strength. And every woman deserves to know, you are not weak. You are not disposable. You are extraordinary." The crowd erupted in cheers, not the polite applause of wealthy elites, but the raw gratitude of people who saw themselves in her journey. As Elena stepped down, Michael was waiting. He took her hand, not possessively like Adrian once had, but gently, as an equal. She looked at him, then at the future stretching before her. Her child, her work, her new life. It was not the fairy tale she once dreamed of. It was something better. And as the sun set behind her, Elena Hart walked forward with a smile. No longer a woman defined by her fall, but a woman who taught the world how to rise. So, my dear friends, our story has come to an end. If you are still here with me right now, it means something in Elena's journey has touched your heart in a very personal way. Her story reminds us that even when we are betrayed, humiliated, or pushed to the floor, we can still rise stronger. As Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." What tried to break Elena became the very thing that rebuilt her. And perhaps that is true for each of us. If you feel moved, I invite you to carry this lesson into your own life. Your scars do not define your weakness. They define your strength. Share this story with someone who needs it. Like this video if it gave you hope. And don't forget to subscribe so we can continue to walk through these powerful journeys together. Because here we rise, always, together. The ballroom glittered with light, laughter, and lies. Chandeliers spilled golden beams over the polished marble floor, where New York's elite mingled with glasses of champagne in their hands. Reporters gathered by the velvet ropes, snapping photos, waiting for the grand entrance of the evening's most anticipated guest, billionaire Adrian Kane. And he didn't disappoint. Adrian walked in with his mistress, Sienna Cruz, clinging to his arm. She was young, dazzling in a crimson dress that left little to the imagination. Every step she took screamed victory, and she knew the cameras were on her. For weeks, tabloids had whispered about their affair, but tonight was the first time Adrian dared to flaunt her in public. To him, it was power. To her, it was triumph. To everyone else, it was scandal. But what no one expected was that his ex-wife, Elena Hart, 6 months pregnant with his child, would be there too. Elena hadn't planned to attend. She hated crowds, hated the way the wealthy paraded their jewels like trophies. But as an architect, she had helped design the very ballroom where the charity gala was being held. She had been invited as a courtesy, a footnote in an evening full of glittering names. She almost stayed home, but something inside told her to face the world again, to stop hiding after the painful divorce. She walked in quietly, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, her long navy gown simple but elegant. She didn't belong among the sequins and diamonds, yet her presence drew whispers. Some pitied her, some mocked her, but most were simply curious. What was Adrian's discarded wife doing here? Elena felt the eyes, the judgment, the sting of gossip. She ignored it. She had survived the long nights alone, the cruel headlines, the betrayal of a man she once believed was her forever. She wasn't here for him. She was here to prove to herself that she could still stand tall. But fate was cruel. Across the ballroom, the crowd parted as Adrian pulled Sienna closer, his hand possessively on her waist. His smug smile grew wider when he saw Elena. Sienna leaned in and whispered something that made him chuckle, his eyes cold and sharp. The photographers sensed the tension immediately. Their flashes went off like lightning. Click, click, click. One headline was already writing itself. Billionaire flaunts mistress, ex-wife watches in shame. Elena's chest tightened. She told herself to breathe, to stay calm, but her legs felt weak. The betrayal replayed in her mind. Adrian coming home smelling of another woman's perfume, his excuses, his arrogance, his final words before signing the divorce papers. "You'll never survive without me." She tried to hold her ground. She even forced a smile, though her eyes shimmered with tears. But then Sienna laughed, loud enough for Elena to hear. "Is that the ex-wife? Poor thing. She looks like a servant who got lost." The words pierced deeper than knives. The room blurred. Elena reached for a chair, but her hand slipped. Pain shot through her body, sharp and sudden. A gasp escaped her lips. Then, in front of everyone, Elena collapsed onto the marble floor. For a moment, silence fell. The music stopped. Guests froze, unsure whether to rush forward or to keep sipping their drinks. Whispers swirled like poison smoke. "She's pregnant. Did she faint? Is it the stress?" The paparazzi didn't hesitate. Cameras flashed mercilessly as Elena lay on the ground, clutching her belly. It wasn't just a scandal now. It was a spectacle. Adrian's face drained of color. He had always thought of himself as untouchable, a man above consequence. But seeing Elena motionless, pale, and vulnerable in front of flashing cameras shook something in him. For a split second, the mask of arrogance cracked. "Call an ambulance," someone shouted. Sienna tugged at his arm, hissing, "Don't. It's her problem, not yours." But Adrian couldn't move. His chest tightened as guilt, fear, and something dangerously close to love surged inside him. Elena wasn't just his ex-wife. She was the mother of his unborn child. He pushed past the crowd now beside her and cupped her face. "Elena, stay with me, please." His voice trembled, breaking through the facade of control he always carried. Elena's eyes fluttered, barely open. She saw his face, the man who had broken her heart, the man she thought she hated. And yet, in that instant, her tears slipped free. "Don't touch me," she whispered weakly, her hand pressing harder against her belly. The crowd gasped again. The paparazzi captured every word, every angle. Headlines were multiplying by the second. "Pregnant ex-wife collapses at gala, billionaire kneels in panic." Paramedics rushed in, parting the crowd with urgency. They lifted Elena onto a stretcher, their voices brisk and calm. "She needs immediate care. Move aside." Adrian tried to follow, but a paramedic blocked his way. "Sir, only family." The word sliced through him. Family. Once, Elena had been his world. Now he wasn't even allowed to walk beside her in crisis. He watched helplessly as she was carried out, her face pale against the white sheets, her hands still clutching her unborn child. Reporters shouted questions. "Adrian, will you take responsibility? Is the baby yours? Will you leave the mistress for her?" Sienna's face twisted in fury. This wasn't the story she wanted. She wanted to be the star, not the villain. She grabbed Adrian's arm, but he shook her off, his eyes locked on the ambulance lights fading into the distance. For the first time in years, Adrian Kane felt powerless. The empire he built, the reputation he flaunted, the mistress he clung to, all of it meant nothing compared to the image seared in his mind. Elena collapsing, whispering those final words, rejecting his touch. And deep down, a terrifying thought crept into his mind. What if she doesn't survive this night? What if he loses her, and the child forever? And as the sirens wailed into the night, the question remained. Was this the end of Elena's story, or the beginning of Adrian's reckoning? Before Elena Hart became the woman lying unconscious on a stretcher, she had been a girl who believed in love. Her story did not begin in glittering ballrooms or beneath the flash of paparazzi cameras. It began in a small town 2 hours outside of New York City, where the streets smelled of fresh bread from the corner bakery, and neighbors knew each other's names. Elena grew up in a modest brick house with peeling paint and a wild garden her mother tended with devotion. Life was not rich in money, but it was rich in warmth. Her father, Thomas Hart, worked as a history teacher at the local high school. Her mother, Margaret, was a nurse whose hands always carried the faint scent of antiseptic and lavender lotion. Together they raised Elena with values that would guide her long after childhood ended: kindness, resilience, and faith in people's goodness. Elena was bright, curious, and endlessly creative. She spent afternoons sketching buildings in her notebooks, fascinated by the way light played on rooftops and how spaces could make people feel safe or small. By the time she turned 16, she knew she wanted to be an architect. Her dream wasn't about wealth or fame. It was about creating beauty that mattered, homes where families could feel what she once felt: security, love, belonging. She worked hard, earned scholarships, and eventually walked through the gates of Columbia University with stars in her eyes. It was there, in her sophomore year, that she met Adrian Kane. He wasn't a billionaire then. He was just a business major with ambition written in every gesture, every smile. He carried himself with confidence that bordered on arrogance, but when he looked at Elena, something softer shone through. He noticed her sketches, asked her about her projects, and listened. Really listened when she spoke of her dreams. For a girl who had grown up far from privilege, his attention felt like sunlight. He made her laugh, made her feel seen in ways she had never experienced before. Within months, they were inseparable. By the time they graduated, Adrian had already started laying the foundation of the empire he would one day command. And Elena, she believed she was building a future with him, one brick of trust at a time. Their wedding was small, intimate, held in the very garden where Elena had played as a child. Her parents beamed with pride. Adrian promised to cherish her, to stand by her side no matter what storms came. And Elena, with all the sincerity of a woman in love, believed him. For a while, life felt like a dream. Adrian's businesses grew rapidly, drawing investors and media attention. Elena began working at a respected architectural firm, designing schools and community centers. They were busy, yes, but they were together. On quiet evenings, Adrian would bring her takeout after long hours at the office, and she would show him her sketches, imagining a house of their own one day. But power changes people. As Adrian climbed higher, the man she married began to slip away. He spent more nights at meetings, more weekends at corporate retreats. He grew sharper, hungrier, always chasing the next deal, the next conquest. When Elena asked if he was overworking, he brushed her off with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Still, she tried to support him. She left her firm when he suggested she focus on smaller projects, claiming her career was distracting her from their marriage. She agreed, thinking it was temporary, that once he was stable, she could return to her dreams. She poured her energy into building a home, into being the steady anchor to his storm. Then came the pregnancy. When Elena discovered she was expecting, her heart swelled with hope. She imagined Adrian softening, returning to the man she once knew. She told him the news one quiet evening over dinner, her hands trembling with nervous joy. For a moment she saw the old Adrian in his eyes, surprised, emotional, almost tender. He hugged her, kissed her forehead, promised he would take care of her. But reality was different. As her belly grew, so did his distance. Instead of being more present, Adrian became colder, slipping further into the glittering world of investors, models, and endless parties. He wasn't cruel at first, just absent. But absence can be just as painful as betrayal. Elena spent lonely nights in their penthouse, her hand resting on her stomach, whispering promises to the child while wondering if Adrian would even be home for the birth. And then the betrayal became undeniable. She found a lipstick stain on his collar, a perfume that wasn't hers lingering on his jacket, late-night texts he guarded like secrets. Each time she asked, he gaslighted her, told her she was paranoid, hormonal, imagining things. She wanted to believe him. Oh, how desperately she wanted to believe him. But the truth was already carving cracks in her heart. When she finally caught him, truly caught him, walking into a restaurant with Sienna Cruz on his arm, smiling as if he had no wife at all, the world collapsed. Paparazzi captured the image before Elena even had the strength to turn away. The headline the next morning read, "Billionaire Kane and Mystery Woman Spark Romance Rumors. Mystery Woman, Mistress." Proof that Elena's fears had never been paranoia. The divorce followed swiftly, brutal in its coldness. Adrian's lawyers tried to strip her of dignity, claiming she deserved nothing, that she had contributed little to his empire. He didn't care that she carried his child. To him, she was an inconvenience, a problem to be erased. Yet Elena did not break. She signed the papers, packed her belongings, and walked away from the life she thought was hers. It wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the end of the girl who once believed love could conquer everything. Now she was a woman, a mother, and she would survive, even if it meant standing alone. She returned to architecture quietly, taking small projects under a different name, refusing to let gossip destroy her passion. She avoided parties, galas, the bright lights of the world Adrian now ruled. She lived simply, focusing on her baby, building strength in silence. But no matter how hard she tried, fate had its way of dragging her back into the storm. And that was how Elena Hart, 6 months pregnant and still healing from heartbreak, found herself standing in the very ballroom she once helped design, face to face with the man who betrayed her, and the mistress who replaced her. And when her legs gave way that night, when she collapsed beneath the weight of humiliation and pain, she never imagined who would come rushing to her side.